All right, let's talk about the forEach challenge. Going over the prompt, we got to recreate the built-in array method forEach. We'll write a function that takes as parameters an array, ARR, and a callback function, CB. The forEach function will iterate through the array, passing each element and its index as arguments to the callback. After that, we'll create a variable named delays and assign it an array with the numbers 200, 500, 0, and 350 in that order. And then we'll write a function called DelayLog that takes as an input a delay time and an index I. When invoked, the function should wait delay time milliseconds before logging to the console the string printing element I, with I replacing, where I is replaced with the index that was passed into DelayLog. And then lastly, we will put these three things together and run the DelayLog function on each item of the delays array using our new or recreated forEach function that we created at the beginning. So let's get going with some pseudocode here. To start, starting from the top, we'll need to create our forEach function. As the prompt outlines, this will have two inputs, an array called ARR and a callback function called CB. And then what this function forEach actually needs to do is iterate through the array and invoke callback with each element and its index passed in. After that, we'll need to create delays array to hold the four numbers, to hold, I guess I'll just write it out, to hold 200, 500, 0, and 350. Thirdly, we'll need to create our delay log function, and its inputs will be a sort of a time in milliseconds called delay time. Let's say a number of milliseconds to be more accurate, number of milliseconds, because the value passed in will just simply be a number, and then an index I. So that's also just will be a number, but it will represent an index of an array, and we'll see that when it comes together at the end when we're invoking forEach. But inside delay log, we need to wait delay time number of milliseconds, and then console log printing element I, where I will not be the letter I, but will be the argument that was passed in for I. So to do this, we're going to need to use the set timeout asynchronous JavaScript function, and the inputs into set timeout will be the two arguments, I should say, will be a callback that console logs our string and our delay time. And this will basically, set timeout will pass this callback to the callback queue and then wait the delay time number of milliseconds before actually invoking it. Great, so that is our delay log function. And then lastly, we will just need to, using forEach, iterate over delays, and invoke delay log on each element. Wonderful. So let's jump back up to the top and set up forEach, function forEach. And as we stated, this will take two arguments, our array and our callback CB. Let's stay organized, move this pseudo code up. And all we need to do here is iterate over this array and pass each element and its associated index into the callback function. So we can use a basic for loop starting at 0, I'm going all the way up to array.length and incrementing by 1. And then we will just invoke our callback with our current element and our current index passed in. Next up, we need to create our delays array. And you'll notice nowhere in our pseudocode are we ever reassigning this delays variable, so we can use a constant here to set this up. And these values that I typed down earlier, I'm going to just copy and paste over, just grabbing these from the prompt itself. Next up, we need to create our delay log function. And again, as outlined in our pseudocode and the prompt, we are going to have two parameters here, delay time and index I. Let me move this up. So overall here, we need to wait the delay time number of milliseconds. And as we stated, we're going to use set timeout to do this. So we'll call set timeout. And we need to pass it two arguments, a callback that console logs our string, and then the delay time that was passed in. So we can define this callback. Since it's so simple, it's just going to console log the string. We can define this callback function right in line in our set timeout using an arrow function. So all it will do is just console log the string printing element. And then as we stated before, we don't want to actually console log the string I, but we want to console log, we want to insert the parameter I into the string. So we will use this syntax to do that. And then the second argument that we pass into set timeout is the delay time, the number of milliseconds we want to wait before invoking this callback function. And that's simply the delay time that was passed in. Okay, and then to bring this all together, we need to invoke forEach and pass in our delays array and our delay log function. And what this is going to do is execute our forEach function, which will iterate over the array we've passed in, which is delays. And for each element, it will invoke delay log and pass in the current element as the first argument, which is the element which will be passed in as the delay time into delay log. And the second argument will be the index that we're currently at. So for example, for this first element, we'll invoke delay log with 200 and 0. And we will go through and do that for each element in delays. So we will invoke set timeout in the order in which these elements are positioned in the array. So we'll call set timeout for the element 200 first, and then 500, and then 0, and then 350. And you might therefore expect our console logs to also then come in that order where we're printing for element 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. But as you'll see, that's not actually the order in which we see those console logs. So let's run this code. Great, and you see that we see printing element 2, then printing element 0, 3, and 1. And you'll notice that that matches the sort of lowest to highest number of milliseconds. So set timeout will passes these callbacks to the callback queue, and then we'll wait the specified amount of time to run that callback. And therefore, since the element at index 2 had the shortest wait, the smallest number of milliseconds, that string got console logged first. The second shortest was 200, so printing element 0 got printed second, and so forth.